Welcome to this diorama from the Luton Model Railway Club. Please allow some time to become accustomed to the reduced lighting before moving around as you view the scene. It is a warm, moonlit night, and the silence is broken by a pair of tawny owls hooting to each other as they survey the landscape for potential prey. Also, the Class 40 locomotive is idling with its characteristic whistling noise. The date is the 8th of August 1963 at approximately 3:24 in the morning, and a southbound train has halted on a small overbridge where the railway crosses a minor road, some distance to the north of Cheddington Station. The train is the nightly up postal service from Glasgow to London Euston, which ran for many years. This train carried mail and some high-value items in travelling post office vehicles and was manned by about 70 postal workers and sorters. D326, the English electric Type 4 locomotive, in later times known as the Class 40, had been unexpectedly halted by a red signal about 800 yards north of the position you see here. This was at a location known as Sears Crossing. The signal had been tampered with to hide the green aspect and made to falsely show a red indication. At this point the locomotive crew were overpowered, the front two coaches uncoupled from the rest of the train and moved forward until reaching a white marker placed close to the bridge where the assault on the mail coach was ready to take place. This location, originally known as 127 Bridigo Bridge, has now been renamed by Network Rail as Robbers Bridge. The place for the robbery was believed to have been selected due to its remote location on a quiet country road where there was little human activity and few people living nearby. This scene of the activity that night shows a gang of 15 men in the process of robbing the train of over £2.6 million in used banknotes, a massive sum at the time. Much of the money was virtually untraceable and ultimately never recovered. In a short time the second coach was broken into and 120 mailbags of money were moved to a waiting Austin lorry and two Land Rovers, which were positioned by the retaining wall alongside the bridge. Within 30 minutes the robbery was complete and the gang made their escape to a farmhouse hideout near Brill, known as Leatherslade Farm. What is not widely known is that there were a number of fundamental errors made that night, which could have meant the robbery might not have taken place. The robbers were at risk of either being seen or possibly hit by a passing train, especially on the down-fast line which they had to repeatedly cross whilst moving the mailbags. They seriously misjudged the stopping point for a locomotive the length of a Type 4 engine and the first coach, making over 150 feet for the heavy mailbags to be carried from the TPO coach to the waiting vehicles by the bridge. This was too far for a human chain, especially as the gang was already reduced due to the need for at least one person having to stand guard over the postal workers. It is likely that this added extra time to the raid. Direct access to the carriage was from the non-platform side, making unloading more difficult as the two larger sliding doors on the TPO could not be used, and it was starting to get light at around 4 a.m, and there was an increased risk of detection. The rest of the story is history and is well documented in print and other media, although there are many errors that have crept into the accounts over time. The event portrayed here became known as the Great Train Robbery, and over the following years has become part of the national consciousness for many people. Whatever people feel for the morality of the event and the activities that took place that summer evening in 1963, it has become and remains a somewhat notorious part of our country's history. We recognise that this event may hold some deep feelings for some people, and Luton Model Railway Club wishes to make it clear that we do not condone the actions or events of that night, and therefore are inviting everyone to join us in making a charitable contribution to the Railway Benefit Fund, which is a charity which supports former railway workers.
Well, I'm basically responsible for the scenery, the figures, the water, the ballasting, and some of the general impression that it creates. I also helped with the construction of the TPO, and I finished off the vehicles from the basic untreatable or untreated state, shall we say. The water is magic water from America, and it forms a nice hard, a clear effect. The scenery is, I tried to base it on what I think an August scenery would look like, and it's the grass is starting to go yellowish, There is a selection of different foliages, different colours of foliage. There is, in addition, there is the fencing that I had to do, which I researched from the photographic evidence. And then there's the ballasting, which is laborious, but it's got to be done. And the painting of the rail edges was also down to me. The hardest part really was the line sign fencing, which runs in an uneven pattern along. That is laborious and time consuming, but hopefully it looks the part. That's about it really.
I was conscripted to build the telegraph poles and the electricity distribution pole here. I think it was mainly because I'd previously made some signals for a previous club layout. The telegraph poles are made out of wood dowling. Some of the insulators and cross beams on them cross arms are cast. Ran out of cast pieces, so I made the remainder out of plasticard and pieces of brass tubing and pins. Of course, before I started all this, I had to do some research in it, studying the photographs, because there were different number of arms on one side of the track to the other. In actual fact, what I did find, a very interesting article that I'd cut out and saved from several years ago, which in actually fact was in the BRM. And I got most of the information I wanted from out of that, minimum height of the lowest arm and that sort of thing. And yeah, we went on from there. I think the hardest thing though was when we had to prefabricate the footholds. They had to be slotted in, and I found that if we weren't careful, we were actual fact splitting open the posts. So what I did in the end was I started making up the footholds out of staples, and soldering the support arm underneath the footrests, and very gingerly and very carefully drilling into the posts to fit them on. The thing that we had least information on was this electricity distribution pole near the bridge, and nothing in any of the photographs were very clear, so I had to use my own judgment on that. Even if I say so myself, it doesn't look too bad.
The TPO vehicle is made from a Westdale kit. It was a one-off vehicle, and the proprietor of Westdale kindly made that vehicle for us because one wasn't available. It's an aluminium extrusion with a wooden floor and bogies by sidelines. What we did find as we constructed it, more and more photos came through, and right at the last moment when we'd painted the vehicle and put the transfers on, we realised that there was actually 2 rows of ventilators on the roof. We had only put 1 row on. So it was a mad panic to put another row of ventilators on, which we managed to do with no damage to the vehicle whatsoever. The BG vehicle was made by myself from a sidelines kit, and I'd finished it a few months before, and it was suggested that we could use it for the diorama, but I had to do a little bit of work to one side of the vehicle to add strapping above the doors and renumber it.
My name's Nigel Adams. I was the poor person who actually conceived this project from the start, and my involvement has been the construction of the catenary and the Class 40 locomotive and the Austin lorry that was used in the main part of the raid. The catenary is predominantly scratch built because of course there wasn't a catenary kit as such, but it was using some extra parts from N-scale brass, and then I hand constructed all the rest of the parts that go with it. And of course the catenary is interesting because it has an unfinished look about it, which is exactly how it was at the time of the robbery, where the catenary was gradually being extended towards London. So that was quite an interesting thing to make, but it does have an element of fragility about it, so I'm very conscious of being very careful when we handle it. The Class 40 is a Pete Waterman, just like the real thing, kit with some extensive modifications and enhancements. We've added cab lighting and the head code lighting, and the head codes themselves were positioned exactly as the real locomotive had them, with them being slightly offset. The loco has stored charge lighting, and the fan is powered very similar way to the Heldren models are in the top. It's twin motored, it has all axles driven, is all independently sprung, and the locomotive is actually quite full of electronics. The Austin lorry is a Langley kit, and that was white metal and resin. The white metal was quite good, the resin needed a fair bit of filling to actually make that look presentable. And then we added the lighting into the road vehicles, purely to try and again bring the scene to life, because a diorama being a static display needed just a little bit of something to bring it, to make it into a piece of theatre. One of the things we wanted to do with this was obviously depict the scene as a nighttime display, and to do that we needed obviously a darkened enclosure, so we've created this black gazebo, which is basically our tent, and people coming in obviously see the scene with dark at the beginning, so their eyes get accustomed to what will be the nighttime scene, and then we have some lighting effects that as the story unfolds and we explain the action that's going on of the event that night, we're then showing it through a sequence of controlled lights, and that's done using a normal computer with some DMX lighting. DMX is the protocol that's used on mainly lighting shows for discos and shows that are theatrical events. So we've taken a small part of that, the control system, and we control the lighting, including the actual ambient lighting, which can be then dimmed, so it reacts just like theatre lighting. The lighting goes down, the sequence runs, there's a commentary, and as the commentary proceeds, what you then see is the lighting sequences that highlights the locomotive, the carriage, etc. And at the end it starts to get light and the story shows the lighting coming up. The initial lighting of course is the owl, and then the sequence then continues with the Class 40, and the Class 40 is highlighted in the same way. Because of the distance we use two lights in fact to bring up the lighting on the 40. And then as the discussion of the locomotive involvement and how it was moved to the scene progresses, we then go on to cover the TPO itself, and again that is highlighted using two sets of lights, purely because of the way the distancing works, and we're trying to get as much coverage as we can. So you see the TPO lighting, and that then brings us on to the final part of the story, which obviously shows us the scene of the actual robbers' vehicles, which highlight the vehicles and the people in the act of actually loading the mailbags. And this lighting sequence is controlled through the computer just to give it a flow that gives the overall effect, which lasts just over 4 minutes.